Hey, what's up guys? This video is going to be a theoretical discussion on why the 36 yard zero I believe is the best to go with, specifically for a general purpose rifle. And there's going to be a few things I'm going to be discussing. One of them is going to be conceivable and inconceivable distances, and this is also going to go into the limitations of yourself, your equipment, and what I just said, the conceivable and inconceivable distances. One of the next thing I'm going to talk about is object aiming compared to subject aiming and how that's going to come into play when talking about the 36 yard zero. And then I'm going to finally go into my discussion after showing you guys the real world application on these targets. I'm going to go into the discussion as to why I believe the 36 yard zero beats out the 25, the 50, and the 100 yard zero. So real quick, what we have here in terms of equipment is a Bear Creek Arsenal 16-inch barrel with a Sig Tango MSR 1:8 optic. Everything about this build screams consumer grade, affordability, durable yet reliable. Real quick, I want to show you a grouping. I know it's not a 20 shot group or a 10 shot group, but it is a 5 shot group with this rifle at 100 yards. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 right here, and then one right down there, which I believe that was the first shot. I'm not showing you this to brag about my ability, but I am showing it to you to brag about my rifle, because I think for the amount of money I paid for this and what it's able to achieve, it's pretty great results. So anyway, I think this is basically a good representation of a general purpose rifle. It's not CQB. It's not a special purpose rifle that's designed for almost getting into designated marksman area or sniper, right? The thing you have to understand with the general purpose rifle is, I would say that it's really designed for engagements 300 yards and in. At 400 yards, it's doable, depending on how big the target is and how much of the target is exposed. And 500 yards is getting kind of dodgy. So unless there's a huge alien invasion and there's a swarm of aliens out in an open field, I'm not going to be taking 500 yard shots unless I'm going to be volleying them into an entire group of aliens that came from outer space. So you got to first understand the limitations of yourself. And now we're going to get into conceivable and inconceivable distances with a general purpose rifle. First and foremost, a big part of the discussion is what you can conceive with your bare eyes and what you can estimate in terms of distance. And this is really going to come into play when I start demonstrating here on these silhouettes. I would say that the average person can conceive of making shots at 200 yards with just iron sights. Some people are going to say, well, my eyes are bad. I'm more like 100 or within 100. Some people are going to say, I've shot targets out to 500 yards with iron sights. But I'm saying that engaging targets with just iron sights is conceivable out to maybe about 300 yards, okay? The whole point of running an LPVO, right, in this optic, because you may have somebody who maybe has a red dot, maybe as an LPVO, but what they don't have is a high-powered magnification scope with a detailed reticle. So they're going to have, this is a perfect example, a 1:8 that has magnification. It's going to get you out to about that 300-400 yard range. After that, it's going to be hard. When I was shooting this day where I shot all these targets, I was able to shoot the guys next to me bolt action rifle chambered in 308. He had a 36 magnification optic, and I could probably read a license plate at 600 yards. I was making 600 yard shots. I got 3 shots I made 2 out of 3 pretty easily. That, on the other hand, if I was shooting this, I would be winging rounds. They'd be flying all over the place. I really couldn't do it. Now, again, this is designed for mobility. This is designed for general marksmanship. All this comes into the totality of what you're doing. One of the biggest factors in consideration is going to be ammunition. Your ammunition is going to determine if you can even take a shot at 300 yards. If you're using bad ammo, you only have so many rounds on you at a given time. So if you don't trust you could hit something at 300 yards, right? Some ammo can change from a sub MOA to over a 2 to 4 inch MOA, depending on what you're using. So at 300 yards, that's going to be a 12-inch group. You're going to have to determine if you want to take that shot. That's why you have to understand the limitations of your ammo. Within the conceivable distance of 300 yards, there's roughly 3 different designations. That's before 100 yards. A human being can estimate before 100 yards. They could estimate about 100 yards to 200 to 300 yards. And then I would say that beyond 300 yards, people are going to be taking really wild guesses. And you could experiment with this and try it for yourself. Grab a rangefinder, grab a few friends, and just start testing each other's ability to estimate distance. What you're going to find is they're going to be 10 yards off at 50 yards. They're going to be 25 yards off at 100 yards. They're not going to be able to really differentiate 150 to 250 yards. And this is all very important when we're talking about landing shots successfully in a situation where you're not mounted on a bipod, you're huffing and puffing, you're running and gunning, and you're under stress, right? You're not going to be able to make these sub-MOA shots going out to 300 yards. It's just not going to happen. So this reality is very important to take into consideration. So I hope I addressed that, because being able to estimate distances is going to come into my discussion and argument as to why the 36 yard zero is best compared to the others later on in the video. So now we're going to move to what object aiming is and subject aiming, okay? Subject aiming is this alien that came from outer space is the subject. All these silhouettes today are aliens from outer space. They are the subject. So when you understand your holdovers or your hold unders, right, you're going to know where to aim when engaging your subject. Object aiming is when your subject goes behind an object. And for the rest of this video, this orange line represents the top of the object or the bottom of the object. It could be the top of a log, the top of a dumpster, the top of a house, the top of a car, or it could be the bottom of a windowsill. This target over here represents the same thing. It's just that when I went down range, I did not have the orange tape on me, so I improvised and used one of these targets. But essentially, the edge is going to be where I'm holding. So this is object aiming and subject aiming, okay? The reason why I like thinking of it in this way is because when your target's out in the wide open, you're going to be subject aiming. You're going to be saying, I'm going to aim here to hit there, right? You're going to say it has a vest on, so I either got to hit lower or higher. Well, you have to know where you're going to hold. And I'll show you that in the representations of when I was shooting at these targets. So that's object aiming and subject aiming. Oh yes, real quick. When it comes to object aiming, the reason why I like it so much is because you're anchoring your reticle onto a physical object, as opposed to if you're using a 100 yard zero, your holdover, right, is going to be really high at 200 yards. You're going to be floating in empty space. And what that means is in the heat of the moment, when you're huffing and puffing, running and gunning, you're going to have to somehow estimate that, right, at 200 to 300 yards. And if it's, say this is the roof line and your subject is behind it and it's going to pop up, well, now you're floating in a clear blue sky. And to me, I would rather anchor onto a physical object, let alone this physical object is a roof and it has shingles. Each deviation between the shingles, right, you're going to have a line that separates one shingle from the next. That's going to give you more detail to anchor onto. So now, like I say, I think the alien's going to pop up on this part of the roof. I'm going to anchor my reticle onto the object, and when it stands up, as long as it's past 36 yards and before 300, there's a high probability that the bullet's going to land right where it needs to. And that's what's beautiful about the 36 yard zero. So here we're going to get into some examples of what I was shooting at range. I you that I was not going for a sub MOA grouping. This was more simulating letting rounds fly and not going for precision shooting, okay? On some of these, I can't remember which, but I was zoomed out. I think on this grouping, I was zoomed out. I was not cropped in. I was not going for precision. This was at 100 yards with a 36 yard zero. My point of aim was center mass. This is where my bullets landed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 10 on here, okay? 10 all around here. It's a few inches high. Real quick, I'm going to run and get the ruler. And we're going to run back and show you guys. Okay, so at 100 yards, if this was my hold, the center of that group is looking at 3.5 inches, or like 3 inches, I would say. That was at 100 yards. At 200 yards, again, when the reticle zoomed out at 4 power, the actual center dot on a second focal plane optic is taking up a large portion of the chest. So, you know, again, I'm not going for precision. I'm aiming for center mass. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 is somewhere on or off this target. This was pretty close to point of aim, point of impact, okay? So this was at 200 yards, and this is what I would deem subject aiming. I'm aiming on the subject. So my point of aim was center mass. If it has a vest on, especially, you know, I'm going to be aiming more right above the nipple line. If I want to get above, or I could aim for the chin, which is the same thing as aiming on that orange line, which represents whatever the object is. Or I could aim for the inseam, which hopefully puts me somewhere around the pelvic girdle. So this is subject aiming, okay? Aiming on the subject. Now, when aiming, object aiming, we have a 100 yard target right here. My point of aim was right here. My shots were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that grouping right there, that is putting me at roughly, I would say 3.5 inches if you take the center of that group, roughly. 3 inches maybe, something like that. Over here, my point of aim was right here. You can see my shots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10 might have been just high. So you could see right at 200 yards what that group looks like. Now I want you to imagine for a second that this was a if this was a 25 yard zero, my point of aim and my point of impact, right, the difference would have been closer to 5 to, there's some people when you look online, they're 25 yard zeros shooting 8 inches high when they're in the 100 to 200 yard range. So you can imagine, right, that these upper ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, could have been off. And they could have been high. So I could have missed maybe half my shots if I was using a 25 yard zero. So now we're going to get into, now that you've guys seen the real world application of the 36 yard zero, I want to get into comparing it to the other combat zeros out there. So let's compare it to the 25-yard zero. The 25-yard zero, once the bullet gets out somewhere between 100 to 200 yards, it's going to be shooting higher than what the 36-yard zero is. And that's why when it goes into the 100 to 200 yard range, I prefer the 36, because if I hold on the object, I know that it's a tighter spread and I have a better chance of hitting the object. Now with the 50-yard zero, 50 goes out to 200 to 250 yards, depending on what your setup is. The reason why I don't like that is because, again, I think that most people can estimate distances out to 100. They could say that's a little bit past 100. I would say that if you took 20 people and you asked them to mark off 150 yards or 250 yards, I think they would be off by almost 100 yards depending on the situation. And this comes into play when the effective range of the general purpose rifle should be about 300 yards. If I am object aiming and I'm saying I have a 50 to 200 yard zero, well, guess what? If I'm off by 50 yards, I'm going to hit the object itself. Now, if you know your zeros, this conversation, right, you could use whatever zero you want. And then there's going to be some people that are going to say, well, I could use my BDC reticle. The truth is that, yes, you can use your BDC reticle or whatever holdovers you have in your optic. But the thing is that it's always a lot more accurate using the center reticle. And with that being said, if you don't have a rangefinder on you, if you don't know the distances of the object, because again, you're a general purpose rifleman, you may not have those items on you. You may not have the scope you need. You may not have the bipod and stuff. So you have to really rely on this light setup. So again, you're going to have trouble estimating the difference between 150 and 250 yards. You think it's at 200 yards, it's maybe going to go short, okay? Now the 100-yard zero is great. It's a really tight grouping out to 100 yards. At 200 yards, it's 4 inches low. At 300 yards, you're now a foot low, right? You're going to aim. If you aim center mass, you're going to aim a foot down. You're going to be in the waist, okay? That works. Pelvic girdle hit, right? That's great. The problem is, right, when it comes to subject aiming with the 100-yard zero, if they have a vest on and you're trying to do a headshot, you're going to have to be floating in empty space, and you're going to have to estimate correctly how far away they are. I know with the 36-yard zero, if this is their chin, that there's a great likelihood that I'm going to hit the head because I'm able to anchor onto a physical object, which in this example is the subject itself. Rather than floating in empty space with the 100-yard zero, that's going to be a lot harder to do. So this is where I think the advantage of the 36-yard zero comes into play. So once you understand your holdovers and your hold unders, any of these zeroings can be viable, but I would say that in that effective range, in that, in that conceivable distance, right, which is really the conceivable distance, again, is a human's ability to estimate distance. So again, there's the 100-yard and in, there's about 100 to 200 or so, or maybe 300, right? So there's up to 100, there's 100 to 300, and then there's holy shit, that's far. So unless you have rangefinders, you're not going to be able to conceive this, and that's why I say the 36-yard zero does the best job at having the advantage over the 25-yard zero when it comes to not shooting too high at distances like 100, and it has the advantage over the 100-yard zero because, again, you don't have to float in empty space if you think they're at 200 to 300 yards. This is essentially the argument that I'm making as for the 36 yard zero. I hope this video was a coherent idea expressed properly. I'd love to hear your thoughts and to see if you guys think that makes sense. And that is really it. So I'm going to end it there. Thank you if you made it this far. Have a good night. Good day. Whatever time of the 24 hours it is for you.